energy into and out of them really easily. So you only really saw this previously in Santiago. But again, this was a race to the line with energy. So I think for a lot of the drivers, it was very much more familiar if they were used to Formula E. I think also it was a proper dogfight because the track is so short. They were bunched up continuously. You know, even if you were going to be lapped, you were going to be right next to everybody else. And yeah, I think that made it feel very much like a proper Formula E race, a heartbreaking race, a race with some very unexpected results, a race where a lot of drivers had significant problems, but very much more like we would have seen at the end of season 4 than we necessarily would have expected by this point in season 5. And appropriately, Jeb won it for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about a race where Jev won, and again, we're talking about a race where, well, with Sanya, it was a case of the cameras not catching it, but here there was, well, to those of us accustomed to season 5 levels of anxiety, there was a lack of action, although, of course, it was all tension below the surface. I mean, Conrad, did you feel that your toys have been taken away a bit in the sense, in that we weren't getting that non-stop action, or did you kind of clue into the tension being there instead?
I found it quite an enjoyable race for different reasons, like what Hazel hinted at. It was a throwback to classic Formula E races. I was thinking more like season 1 and 2 because of the way it panned out. The beginning few laps were really, really smooth from all the drivers. There wasn't any contact, I believe. And it all settled down really nicely. And it not just a staple recent Monaco race where you'd expect such a tight street circuit to offer at least a crash or two, but it was incredibly smooth, and then there was a building of anticipation about how strategies would play out and energy saving, and it reminded me of a more cautious outlook. I think around season 2, that's probably the calmest season I've seen, and it was like a throwback to those days where you had to wait quite a while for the action to build up, but by the end, you'd be building a lot of tension within your over how like a top 4 or 5 would be able to win the race and how they go about it. And then at the end, we had the train of the 4 cars with Roland putting Verne under a lot of pressure and then Verline behind.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this, Conrad, in the last podcast, but Hazel, do you feel that Oliver Rowland is the most impressive driver of the season for how he's handled that situation at the start, but also for just the way that he's outpaced his teammates and also taken the fight to experienced drivers?
I mean, to go back to earlier seasons, if at this point in season 3, so after Buemi takes pole to win for, I think, the 5th time that season in Monaco. I might be wrong. I might have forgotten what order the races were. But you know, Buemi is still the man who has won the most Formula E races ever. He hasn't won for 2 seasons. And last season, the team was in a bit of a state. Something seemed to have gone wrong. They calibrated the cars wrong at the start of the season. Okay. This season, there's nothing wrong with that car. Oliver Rowland is getting the results, and he's rinsing Sebastian, which is, to somebody who's been following Formula E from the start. So if he came in the last 2 seasons, then you'd be like, well, Sebastian's kind of never really been anywhere, because that's sort of where he's been at that point. But for somebody who is a relative newbie, he didn't even participate in the majority of pre-season testing. So he didn't do the manufacturer testing for Nissan. He only got 1 day, which was very disrupted and wet in Valencia. And, you know, Oliver was in junior series. He has done a little bit of WEC, but he's really not been... He's not one of the drivers who comes in relatively young but has huge amounts of experience behind them. He's a driver who was sort of out of a job at the point that he came in, and I would compare his performance this season with Daniel Abt's last season against Lucas. So Daniel, even if you discount the lost win in Hong Kong, which he won on track but the team screwed up for him, like Daniel utterly trounced Lucas for the whole first half of the season, and then Lucas got the win in Zurich, and then it sort of went into a big run of success for him. But up until that point, Daniel was making Lucas look like an idiot. And to have the then reigning champion trounced in that way, to have Buemi trounced by Roland, like, there is, I don't think it's that Seb or Lucas kind of fell off. I think it's that there is momentum in Formula E. It's incredibly important to put the whole day together in a row, to put every session together one after another. And if you just click it and the other person can't, then Roland's in a very good team. So I think it's very difficult to benchmark him against, say, Maxi Günther, who to me is actually the standout star of this season. Günther and Mitch Evans have really overperformed frequently. So Günther, it's Mitch Evans, it's more obvious because he finally got the win for Jaguar. With Günther, it's less obvious because they're really fighting for the back of the points if they can get anything. But in a team that's falling apart to a fairly large extent, with no certainty about his contract, like, he has managed to put in some very, very confident, very mature drives compared to drivers with more experience. So yeah, I think Roland certainly is up there compared to those two. I think I'd certainly put them in a trio of, like, really stonking performances this year. And I think yeah, you have to respect Ollie Roland. You know, he doesn't come from money. He's a racer who had to be supported by the Racing Steps Foundation to get through most of his junior career. He's not especially well connected. He's not, you know, he's someone running on raw talent. And this was his opportunity to step it up, and he has seriously grabbed it.
Well, yeah, incredibly impressive. And if anything, he's not underrated, because a lot of people have said this, but it feels like some of the brighter, shinier, more glamorous drivers have perhaps stolen the limelight still. You know, it's a little bit like what we talk about with the Premier League. It's just much easier to get excited about a foreign footballer than about a footballer from Barnsley. But I think that's maybe what we're dealing with here. It's a little bit of inverse snobbery, in the sense that, you know, we Brits don't like to get overexcited about one of our own, do we?
I think there's maybe a shade of that. I think also just people don't know who he is. So people don't know who a lot of the Formula E drivers are. Like, you know, 5 years ago when it started, people didn't know who Sam Bird was. People didn't know who Lucas Di Grassi was. He was like some failure from Virgin F1. But at the time, backmarker F1 drivers were cycled through faster than,
yeah,
clean sets of thermal underwear at a Formula E race. But I think we probably, it's sort of easy to understate the reaction. Certainly, people in the paddock are very impressed with Ollie. The team are very impressed with and proud of him. The team obviously wants Seb to come back to where he was. That's the goal. You know, when Ollie hasn't turned into Seb, he hasn't sort of suddenly completely dominated the series. But so I don't think we have any intention of losing faith in Buemi. I don't think, you know, there's any of that. But I think, whilst he might not be grabbing huge numbers of headlines, because in a way there's nothing to write about a success sometimes. He certainly has made it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Daniel Abt took Lucas Di Grassi to the cleaners at one point in season 4. And it's possible to say that Audi as a whole have not had that kind of season this season. But it just seemed to me to be ludicrous that the Formula E rumour mill would even suggest that Daniel Abt was a driver at risk. Now, I think this came from a comment that he made to sort of play brinkmanship with his management and the Audi management to say, well, you better take up that option, otherwise I'll be moving on. It's typical tactics of someone who wants a new contract. But it seems like the rumour mill have actually taken this and run with it and are suggesting he's at risk. Do you give that any credence at all?
Audi have 4 drivers in Formula E right now. They have their 2 factory team drivers. They have Sam Bird, they have Robin Frijns. Only one of them hasn't won a race.
Yeah.
So, yes, potentially. Robin is a factory Audi driver. Sam is not, but I'm sure they could probably reel him in. The competition for Formula E seats is incredibly fierce. Daniel is aware he needs to deliver a win. Do I really think they'd kick him out? No, not really, because actually they know that, or not at this stage. I think, if we get to the end of the season and he is where he is now in the points, then yes, he is genuinely at risk. But there's still, 4 races left. That could be a huge number of points on the table. He works well with Lucas. He's been there since the start. There's a huge benefit to consistency. So yeah, I think whilst they have Lucas, I would probably not really give a huge amount of credibility to Daniel being at risk, unless Virgin stop being an Audi customer team.
One thing that I'd quite...
they're likely to, but if they did, then it is more of a priority to Audi to keep Robin in Formula E than it is Daniel.
Just before you come in, Conrad, I want to I want to add, Bird and Degrassi would be tasty as a team, but I think Frijns and Degrassi, given what's happened earlier in the season, would not just be tasty, that would be on fire as a team. I would buy a ticket to watch that. Conrad, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. One thing that's quite intriguing me about the situation with Sebastian's struggles and the rise of Oliver Rowland is not just the issue of possibly drivers being on the way out, of the first wave of Formula E drivers that joined from season 1 onwards. The Lucas Di Grassis, the Sebastian Buemis, and also a few WEC drivers that crossed over. It feels like Formula E is starting to get a similar problem to what Formula One's facing right now, which is young blood coming in and, really taking the fight to the established drivers in the same way that Charles Leclerc and others are doing with the likes of Sebastian Vettel. Will teams start to prioritise younger drivers and try and build them up for the future, maybe have less patience with established drivers? And the reason I ask this is because of drivers like Nelson Piquet Jr., whose reputation precedes them, and he ended up without a Jaguar seat due to poor performance, regardless of the success he'd had in the past.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll let you answer this, Hazel, in a moment. But I'd say I've had similar questions myself. I think if you look at some of the, from my point of view at least, the more experienced drivers, Degrassi isn't going anywhere. He's still savvy. He's not getting dropped. Bird obviously has had possibly his best season this season. But yeah, there are a few outliers. Oliver Turvey, he's not getting dropped, but he was outpaced in one race in Paris by Tom Dillman. That's obviously not a trend. But what do you think, Hazel?
So I think there is a risk that Sebastian Buemi finds himself out of a job. He is the highest paid driver in motorsport, as far as I'm aware. Across all 3 of his jobs, Toyota, now Nissan Formula E, and he is also the reserve driver for Red Bull Racing, so Honda, which is quite an incredible triple threat. There is a not insignificant chance that although he is, there was a lot of Alain Prost really liked him, was the person that to some extent brought him into the team, although he had been a Dams driver. Prost is no longer with the team. There have been some changing dynamics, like will Nissan protect somebody who hasn't won for 2 seasons, hasn't got a podium at all this season that I can think of? No, he hasn't. I don't know. No, they'll probably try and bring in a Japanese driver. So I don't think we can regard people like Sebastian's seat as safe. Lucas's seat, I think I would regard as safe. One, he's a champion for that team, which Sebastian is a champion for EDAMS, but he is not a champion for Nissan. It was very much Renault's win. And to, like, he has won this season. He had that incredible streak last season. Audi know that they're not quite there somehow this season. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of teams were not expecting the new race format to be the way it is. We're not expecting so many incidents, so many safety cars, red flags. So, there's a lot of adaptability going on. But I also think, I don't think there are very many drivers in the series who are not at risk of losing their seat. To the extent that I was speaking to Tom Dillman on Saturday after the race, and he said, well, the thing is, once you're running after out of the points, you might as well do something stupid, because you might as well DNF as not finish in the points at this point, because you need them. Like, everyone is now fighting for their seats. So if it's a dive that could crash you out, you will probably make it in the latter half of the race if you're running in 13th, 14th, because if it's death or glory, it's death or glory kind of. And I don't mean literally death, but like so there is something that's quite dramatic happening, and the drivers, so the paddock as a whole is really quite paranoid this year. Partly the things like the conspiracy about Nissan EDAMS have a flywheel in their motor, and things like that, but also things like Techeetah pushing for a harsher penalty against Sam Bird and stuff. Like it's all a bit like nasty games. But it's mostly I think it's because the whole championship is still very open, and because it's still very open, if you are not getting that performance, if you are not getting into the points when you know that even backmarkers can, you can have something like Maxi Gunter in Paris, you have to get there. So the backmarking drivers, the front marking drivers, whether the expectation is you get into the points or you get on the podium, you have to go flat out at this point and try and get that. The pressure is enormous because the championship order is changing so rapidly, and because there's no stability.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we began on Sunday to talk about a potential cortege of at-risk drivers. I mean, it's notable for me that from the position he was in Marrakesh when he launched 1,000 Fence Antonio memes, Alexander Sims is no longer in the championship conversation, and not only that, people are talking about him as potentially being at risk. And it was kind of a race of two halves for him, because he put in that fantastic piece of team driving to slow down Alex Lynn enough to let Da Costa past both of them, and then he was involved in another incident later and ended up finishing, I think, 13th. So two questions really, and Conrad, I'm interested to hear your view on Sims as well, but do you think he's driving in endurance mode and trying to bring the car home a bit too much? And do you think that he has the quality to come through a midfield battle unscathed and also score big points in Formula E?
I think
on the subject...
sorry, Conrad, you
go. On the subject of Alex Sims, he really impressed me at the start of the season. I remember in the earlier stages of Santiago, as well as his first race in Ardiria, he was a standout rookie driver to me. He appeared to have it all. He appeared to have the pace. He appeared to have the skill. He appeared to be able to be on top of the BMW package. And then from then on, it's just been flashes of capability that have become more and more rare. He's losing his way with the BMW package, whereas I wouldn't say Da Costa's been entirely perfect either, which is another surprise because in Santiago, it looked like he even had the potential 2 races in to build a sizable lead. But Sims' display in Monaco was really, really surprising to me, even when he's been tailing off to an extent, because the first incident with Degrassi, I believe he didn't notice. Degrassi, I mean, he wouldn't go in the move on that deliberately. It was definitely a clumsy mistake, but it was a really surprising one to see him make. And then the second one, where he forced frames into the inside wall at the same turn. 2 incidents of that caliber seemed really off colour, and it appears that I think he's probably realising that he's losing a lot of ground on Da Costa and the pressure's on him, and Andretti might not be entirely patient with him. And it reminds me of Sergio Perez in 2013 when he was racing for McLaren. He was being told to get his elbows out, and he had a similar bad time of it in Monaco, and it gave me flashbacks to that. It feels like someone who's unnecessarily, but feeling like they need to be as aggressive as possible.
Yeah, and also there's other parallels in that, just like with Sergio Perez at McLaren, well, Perez was brought in by Martin Whitmarsh, who was then replaced by the returning Ron Dennis, and well, Sims is definitely BMW's driver, not Andretti's driver. Do you think that might be part of the issue, Hazel?
No. I think if Andretti had any control of the drivers in their stable, then Robin Frijns would have had a seat last year. So I don't think that's an issue. I actually think both Alex and Antonio, don't forget that Antonio was disqualified last race, not for his fault, but for repeatedly reaching 228 kilowatts, which is 8 kilowatts more than you should under attack mode. Or fan boost. He at no point did he activate attack mode and fan boost at the same time, although he did get fan boost. So his attack mode was calibrated wrong. He went 3 kilowatts over the limit. It's not, to some extent, it's out of the driver's hands if everything's completely out of whack. But at the same time, it's a symptom of a team which have been dog last for 3 seasons. Andretti were absolutely awful. They developed a season 2 powertrain that they then couldn't use. They had to then use the season 1 powertrain basically, which was just dire, so they were nowhere. They then tried to use the same powertrain in season 3, slightly adjusted. It was hopelessly inefficient, massively overweight. They also set the differential on the cars totally wrong, so if you look back on any footage, it's particularly obvious in Berlin in season 3. You see them literally wrestling the car, they just can't steer it. It's moving under its own like an AI is taken over driving it. And season 4, Antonio was lapped twice, I think, in New York. He was at least lapped once. His powertrain was so knackered that by the time he got the car back, he just never wanted to see it again. The whole, because they only get one powertrain all season. And it wasn't efficient in the first place, so he was having to work it really hard, and by the time you got to the end, it was just like you might as well be running a season 1 powertrain in a season 4 car at that point. He was using substantially less than the maximum output even in qualifying trim, so which was obviously substantially less than it is now. Then BMW come in, they decided not to really develop on the season 4. They were just like, okay, let's forget about that. Let's focus on generation 2. They developed an efficient powertrain. They were quick at testing. They were really quick in Adiria. They won and all the time they were sort of making Jaguar noises and sort of going, this is really positive, but we don't overhype this, don't assume that we can maintain this, because Andretti have no idea how to be a front running team. That has never been a front running Formula E team. They don't know how to put together a front running weekend, and the only driver they have with any substantial experience is Antonio Felix da Costa, who has spent 3 seasons having the life beaten out of him in a really dreadful car. So what they're doing right now is learning how to put together a team, learning how to put together the Formula E weekend. The operational functions of the team are so important to make sure everything runs smoothly, that you can get the data analysis, that you can get everything that you want. And BMW, obviously, they're a big manufacturer. They want to sprint before they can toddle. And so there's pressure from all over the place. I personally think BMW are kind of where I would expect them to be. I think Sims is an aggressive driver. People think he isn't because he looks quite nerdy. But he is an aggressive driver. He's a very highly skilled driver, and he can fight with people like Lucas. I thought the move with Lucas was Lucas being an optimistic half-wit. He was braking much too late. I thought the second one, there's something you don't really see it on the onboard cameras because the camera is actually higher than the driver's eye height, but you actually can't see a lot on these cars. And there's particular blind spots. My view on the second incident was that it was in both of their blind spots, and it was an unfortunate racing incident. I actually really felt that Alex shouldn't have been penalised. Whether Robin should have been or not, he was. So, but yeah, I don't think Alex could see him. I think Robin could, and took a bit of a chancy line, which didn't pay off for him. But I mean, they do all know that there are blind spots as well. So although Alex couldn't see him, Robin would have known he couldn't see him. And yeah, there is this sort of idea that Alex will sort of like move over, I think, because he is very sweet. He's not an intimidating person.
Oh no, I mean,
but he is a proper like scary competitive driver on track. I think he's had some really unfortunate reliability issues. I think undoubtedly the moment where they came together was terrible. But I mean, yes, I think he's under pressure, but I think he's not under quite as much pressure as it might look like. Because, to be honest, who else are they going to put in that car out of BMW drivers?
Yeah, I feel like Da Costa and Sims are the most emotionally nuanced of the driver combinations we've got this season. Very quick digression. There used to be a fly half who played rugby union for Wasps called Alex King, and he was said to have the face of a permanently worried friar. I feel like Antonio Felix da Costa looks like the kind of man who's been beaten down by life over the years. He looks like an actor from Arrested Development to me, I mean, when I think back to the fact that I think he won GP2 and then was dropped by the Red Bull program for not being quite charismatic enough, and you know, like you say, he got beaten up by Andretti or by driving an Andretti for years. This feels like his time, and again, he's had misfortune, although, you know, obviously part of that's of his making. Sims, I saw a really cool YouTube video recently from when they were launching the BMW M8 GTE, and he was showing people around his farmhouse in Northamptonshire or whatever, and he was talking about you know, the roof trellis and all that kind of stuff, and I thought, This is not your normal guy with a one-bedroom flat in Monaco. He seems to have an emotional hinterland. He seems different, you know, in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Alex Sims runs a green energy charity or a environmental trust. He's not. Yeah, in a way, he isn't a normal racing driver in that respect. I don't think Antonio is though either. They're both. Like, Antonio still lives in his hometown in Portugal. I think both of them have had setbacks, but so have, to be honest, the entire Formula E field. Partly because I don't think you really get a Formula E drive if you come in behaving very flashily. Whilst I'm sure if Lewis Hamilton said he really, really wanted to drive in Formula E, somebody would give him a test. You have to be, and he might turn out to be brilliant, and it would be a big name thing. You have to be like very technical and really quite well, actually no, I mean Lewis is very technical, that's a bad example, but like there are sort of flashier drivers that I think, or like bigger name drivers that I think wouldn't necessarily do very well in the series. We've seen it happen with, say, like Esteban Gutierrez, much bigger name than most of the people in the series at the time, just fresh out of F1, really didn't have a good time, couldn't get the hang of it. And you do have to be quite considered and quite sort of philosophical to be able to do Formula E. You have to be able to, concentrate for an entire day, during which you have to go and do autograph signings. You have to be very sanguine, and you have to sort of not that there are no egos, but you have to be able to sort of deal with yourself in that respect. And I think, both of them have had setbacks. Andretti have certainly had colossal setbacks. So I think, I haven't really... It could be going so much worse for BMW right now. If you look at the team that they were fighting with last year, Neo, and actually Neo really kicked them in the points last year. Even though really, only Oliver Turvey scored points of their drivers. Comparatively, BMW Andretti's season was pretty horrible. It was just straight up horrible. And I think if you look where Neo are now, that could have been BMW. That could have been where their season 5 development ended them up, because nobody really knew. And certainly operationally, it looked like Neo were able to take advantage of opportunities last year where Andretti simply weren't. So, I think you have to benchmark them against where they were, which was dog last. Robin was lapped in Monaco in season 3. I think it's too early to say necessarily that either of the drivers are at risk or that the team is especially unhappy. I think everyone is under pressure, but as I say, I think that's because there is still a chance for most of the teams to take the championship. Yeah. So it comes from a front runner's pressure, not a back marker's panic.
Yeah. Conrad, Monaco was a different kind of race, as we've discussed. It was more like the Formula E races that we've seen in the 4 previous seasons before this one. Would you say that this is part of a pattern, and would you say that teams that produce clearly a superior powertrain like BMW Andretti did at the start of the season will find that they're able to plan strategies better in future seasons and really work with their package a lot more, because this has been a really truncated season because of all these stoppages? So do you think maybe now that people have worked out how to use the Gen 2 cars and how to not have crashes all the time, maybe actually being the best team might be more of an advantage in the future?
When it comes to Monaco, it's hard to say a place like Monaco and such a specific track as it is a pattern for anything, but if there is something to be realised, it is the relevance of being able to plan out a thoughtful strategy and being able to keep within the boundaries of the car. Setup is becoming increasingly important at a stage of the season where there's not many races left and it's still so tightly in the balance. There's a lot of teams that still need to hook up every aspect, because there's some teams that need to find the sweet spot of their car. There's drivers that still need to get up to speed and aren't particularly performing badly, but there's still like a last 5-10% that they could squeeze out of their package. There's teams that still need to sort out their infrastructure a little more. There's a lot of teams that are suffering different things across the board, but the teams that are best placed right now are ones like Virgin, which remind me of Red Bull in Formula 1. They're so finely tuned, well-oiled. and Mahindra as well. They seem to be performing at the best of their capabilities across the board. The ones that I'd be most concerned for are the BMW Andretti, which, as we've discussed before, finding it hard first season in many. That they're at the front. There's a lot of new expectations. There's BMW on board and a new driver. And Nissan as well, who have been absolutely off it this season, consistency-wise. And it's been incredibly topsy-turvy season for them. I think the last races of the season, I really can't see much changing in this regard, because the problem is when you get near to an end of a season, and I'm sure Hazel knows about this a lot more than I do, but when I've seen it in previous seasons, that dial of chaos just keeps getting turned up until you get to the last race of the season and it's dialed all the way up to 11. And there's going to be a lot more drivers that are going to try risky moves simply so they can keep in the fight for the title, because they know a lot of people have got a chance at this. And there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to feel the pressure to go for the Constructors' title. It's not going to be like in some other series where we end up with a dead rubber. There's a potential like there could only be like 1 or 2 points in it for either title in the last race. So I don't really see things calming down. I don't know if Monaco is indicative of the way the rest of the season is going. Yeah, I see there being a recognisable general trend through season 5 of plenty of teams being inconsistent from race to race and not really being solved.
So Hazel, is the final New York doubleheader really going to be like the final scene of Die Hard? Is the Nagatomi Tower going to be on fire again? What do you think?
So I think that it will stay tight until New York. I would be very surprised if we see anyone win it on the Saturday. I would imagine it will go to the Sunday. It did with the teams last year. And I would imagine the drivers will go the same way again. Next race is Berlin. That's always weird because it's on concrete. It's not on tarmac. So, it's an arms race as to who can get the tyres to work. Bern is a complete unknown. It's a total new track. And then New York is a very weird surface even for Formula E. It's sort of broken up old docklands. It's quite a power-hungry track now after they made the changes just before the race last year, which really cheated Sam out of a chance at the title. So yeah, I don't think there's anyone who you can say has an upper hand. And even the teams that are consistently putting it together are not consistently putting it together to the front, and they're often sort of putting it together in the race when they haven't in quali, or vice versa. The differences in efficiency are now very, very low. Certainly, and once you discount Neo and Dragon. So yeah, I think we'll see it go to the end, and I honestly I would not be able to make a prediction. I hope Paris was different, but I hope that we will see more races like Rome, because the drivers were given a pretty thorough talking to about causing incidents. The penalties against causing an incident are considerably harsher. They're now getting penalty points and sort of significantly more reaction. You're getting grid drops for the subsequent race. You're not getting a time penalty in the race in which you committed it, etc. So yeah, I think I am hoping that we'll see more relatively clean racing, that we'll see more kind of proper exciting races like Rome. Like I personally thought that Monaco was an exciting race. I didn't think it was calm at all. I thought that initially there was very little exchange of places, possibly, but there were some real fights going on. So yeah, I think that we will see races like that, and action to the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily mean it was calm. I just meant that it was kind of like comparing. it was like comparing Jason Statham in Crank with Jason Statham in Spy. You know, it was a different kind of action. It felt like not everything was blowing up and exploding every minute, which was good for a live tweeter, because it meant that I could occasionally look down at my keyboard and type, you know. But yeah, so I think also going forward, like you say, we've got different surfaces, and of course the action is different if you're actually there, which brings me on to a slightly selfish subject perhaps. I'm going to be in Berlin, and I'm wondering what to expect, but before you answer that, how long would you like to be on before you get tired, guys? 10 minutes, okay?
I was going to say 10 minutes is probably fine, but then I've got to go and cook dinner.
Sure, no
yeah,
worries.
I've got no plans for tonight, but yeah, I can do whenever.
All right.
So
Sure. Well, okay. So, anyway, back to the question. I'm going to Berlin, and I've so far only seen Formula E on television or on my computer. So, is there a visceral thrill similar to going to your first Grand Prix? And if I've only ever been to ICE powered car meetings, what can I expect that's different in a Formula E meeting?
So Berlin is not quite a standard Formula E track because we go to Tempelhof. It's one of the most spectacular tracks on the circuit to some extent, as in on the overall Formula E circuit. Obviously, they are all circuits. It's in this abandoned Cold War era airport that used to serve West Berlin. It looks very spectacular with Formula E juxtaposed against a rusting airport building. So it's one of the most dramatic locations that we go to some extent. There's very good sight of the track, so if you get high up, you can see basically the whole track because it's on a flat surface with no buildings. It's very hot in Tempelhof because there's no shade, and the concrete kind of radiates heat. That said, it's been really cold and rainy everywhere that we've gone this year, so pack appropriately. It's very, very different from going to see most motorsport, partly because you can get so close to it. You hear everything. It's incredibly visceral watching Formula E cars in person. So you don't necessarily pick up on this from the feed, but there's this noise, and it's actually, the noise is the sound of all of the aerodynamics in the floor. So because Formula E doesn't have a rear wing, all of the downforce is generated by the floor of the car. Mm-hmm. I say all of the downforce, there's not very much, but it's quite a lot of work that the floor's doing. There's a huge amount of turbulent air under the floor, and it makes this noise a bit like a sort of like ghost jet engine. And so when they're coming down a straight at you, when they're coming down the high-speed bits of Tempelhof at you, it's quite like overwhelming. You hear every gear change, every little like bump over a curb, which they do a lot, every tyre squeal. It feels very intimate in the sense that you have a huge amount of, there's no petrol smell, there's no fume smell, so you smell every bit of like tyre that's sliding, and like it feels very, very intimate and sort of very connected to the on-track action. It's also like an incredibly packed day, so you don't get very many breaks. There's basically stuff happening all the time, especially with the I-Paces now, it's a very, Tempelhof in particular has a very festival atmosphere, but kind of all Formula E tracks do. There's a lot of people drinking beer and eating currywurst. It's good fun.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, my press accreditation is in the balance, and that's not a very interesting story. But it will be interesting because obviously I'll get two sides of the experience. I'm either going to be in the media centre and I'll be able to do live reporting, or I'm going to be in what we call the not paddock, and I'm going to be able to experience the fan side of things.
I've done both at Berlin.
Okay.
So the first year I reported from Berlin was literally out of the grandstands.
Well, this is what I was going to ask, actually, because you've been both a fan blogger and a journalist. So, which is more fun?
I mean, kind of, they're just very different things. When I sort of went and was sitting in grandstands, I was like a journalist elsewhere, and then sort of coming to Formula E as something that I really enjoyed and which I was trying to get into. It was very... I guess so. Tempelhof is super fun to go to. You get a lot more sun if you attend as a punter. At the end of the summer of season 3, which I'd done quite a lot of, even when I'd had accreditation, I'd kind of like snuck out to a grandstand to watch the race, because there is something uniquely a little bit flat and grim about watching races from the media centre. Or sometimes there is, it's not always. But yeah, I had a gorgeous tan in the September of 2017, and in the September of 2018, I looked like I'd been dipped into like water for the prior 6 months. Yeah, there's definitely different sides to it. I suppose it depends how enthusiastic you are about using WordPress or whatever on your phone, and how many battery packs you have, how good your roaming data package is. But it's very... Yeah, now I feel very comfortable on either side, to be honest. But particularly in the media centre, like it is home, as it were, after 2 entire seasons now. The last race was my 30th Formula E race. So, yeah, it's very... And this is my second season as a full season journalist, so it's very it's a very different world. On the one hand, I don't know, I do get a tiny bit jealous of my friends who are attending as fans, because there is something very fun about it. Like, you are there just to enjoy yourself. Nobody's going like, "Where's the race report?" Or like, "Go and speak to Andre Lotterer." I don't want to. He's really angry. Go and speak to him. I don't want to. But like, yeah. So there's like completely different stresses. But like, I would also never trade my position now, after however many billions of long haul flights, etc., for anything else. So yeah. But either way, you will enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, really. Looking back at the fact that this is your second full season. When you come into any world, you always assume that everyone who is senior in that world has been there forever. But actually, everyone has their own sort of concerns, worries, whatever, and it's just interesting to hear that anyway, because obviously Conrad semi-jokingly called you the Emperor of Formula E. I mean, that is the kind of position of authority you have for many people who write about the sport. So we're like it or not, hopefully you like it. But
no, I do, and like, yeah, I truly appreciate that, like, people respect what I write about it, that I've built an audience, and that there is an appetite not only for Formula E journalism but for the type of work that I do, which didn't exist when I started doing it. So yeah, I think the world of Formula E is welcoming enough to let you expand the possibilities of covering it, to do lots of different things. The paddock is quite welcoming, even of people with no prior experience in the back end of motorsport. Like, I didn't grow up connected to motorsport. I didn't have any lifelong connections to it, and it's very difficult to get into other notable single-seater championship press centres without that, and it's very the world can be incredibly exclusionary. Formula E isn't, and I think you have to both applaud them for that as an attitude, and I'm very grateful to them for that, because I would not. I probably wouldn't have survived one weekend in the Formula One paddock before being chucked out on my ear. I probably would now, but that's because I understand the world of motorsport as it is, as a political entity, as a social and a class entity.
That's probably something that I'm still struggling to learn, to be honest. That's one of the things that I'm finding hardest to grip with getting into motorsport, is keeping a hold on my political belief and sayings and how strong I am with my opinions.
I would say for sure that Formula E would never sort of behave particularly punitively for most political beliefs. They might make it difficult to attend one of the races, depending on how vociferous you are. But the overall, it's very. There is a Ginny Williams book about Williams that was turned into the Williams film. She was very upper class herself, and so she had absolutely zero qualms talking about how upper class and how closed and how etiquette driven Formula One is, and motorsport in general. And it's very interesting to read her book, because she wrote, I think, the best social history of Formula One and the best description of motorsport paddocks that certainly I've read. And so I think it's important to know that Formula E isn't like that, that it is very egalitarian. There's all kinds of open doors that would be closed in other places, so it's not like everyone goes off to team hospitality to eat lunch. Everyone eats in the same food hall. We eat in the media centre. We're not allowed in that food hall, so we don't bother people whilst they're, eating some broccoli or whatever the drivers are allowed. But there is anyone who came to Formula E with that ego, with those class barriers, would immediately find themselves quite harshly disabused of them. But it is still overwhelmingly the world in which motorsport operates. So Formula E sort of does have a very, very different vibe to other forms of motorsport, but there are all kinds of people will react strangely to you if you don't know etiquette that nobody ever would know if you haven't been forced to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, the thing that I've been astonished by in Formula E this season, which I've been a TV viewer before, but writing about it this season, I've been astonished how quickly the community has invited myself and other people who've also come in this season into it. Peter sadly wasn't able to come on this podcast, Peter Greaves, but he became friends with Sam Smith, the journalist, who is also quite senior, and these kinds of bonds, these kind of alliances, and the fact
I want to be 100% clear, because otherwise I'm going to get some flack when this goes up on YouTube. Sam Smith is considerably senior to me.
And okay, well, point taken. But I mean, there are things like that, and also the fact that Bob Varsha, out of the blue started following me on Twitter. These are minor things in the scheme of things, but they would never happen in Formula One. And I've covered random things. I've covered military parades and Eurovision and fashion shows, and this is by far the thing that's made me feel most included most quickly. So props to Formula E for that. But Conrad, have you felt similarly included by Formula E?
Certainly so. I've been. Within the fan base, and especially on Twitter, I've been nothing but extremely pleased at the way that I've been and the way I've been able to build connections. And a part of that comes from being interested in motorsport from such an early age, and I tried to prepare myself as much as I could, like behind closed doors, or like not putting things on social media, but like when I'm writing when I'm younger. So I feel a lot more confident to put content out there, which means I get a bit more exposure and people start to think, hey, this guy's fairly talented, he writes things that I'm interested in, and the ball starts rolling. I'm not where I wanted to be even now at 19. I think I could have started doing that a lot sooner. But yeah, especially in this past year or so, I've loved it.
I think we're just laughing at the idea of a 19-year-old saying you could have done it sooner, but never mind.
Yeah, it's just the reason I say that is because I've actually seen a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds, and I've seen their content because I like to make sure I read anything people write and try and give them exposure when I can. There's some 16, 17-year-olds out there who are writing incredibly well, like probably better than I am right now. And I just think
there are a lot of young people who properly shit me up in the sense that I know especially now I've done what I did, so I expanded. The only reason I have like any credibility in Formula E is I substantially expanded some of the publications that write about Formula E by basically phoning them up and being like, I'm going to write about Formula E for you. And this won't work for everyone. I have to emphasise that I was a senior producer at the BBC before I was doing this, so I had huge advantages coming into this. Which is why I got where I am as fast as I did. I was already very savvy with the media, even if I didn't necessarily understand motorsport. So, yeah, I know now I've done that. there are like 7 much younger, much more talented, much more hungry people who every time I have a day where I'm like, oh my god, I can't meet that deadline, I'm going to die. I'm aware there's people nipping at my heels. But I also think that, when you look at the size, because I think the media at Formula E is big now. In the sense, I remember Punta del Este last season when there were like maybe 12 of us. And Punta del Este is a real long way from anywhere, which is why. But like now you're seeing like really substantial amounts of media at every Formula E race. You're seeing a lot more broadcasters sending bespoke broadcast people. So you see like a bespoke broadcast team. They're not just taking the world feed and broadcasting from a home studio, and you're seeing a huge expansion of Formula E media. But this is the same thing that happened with Formula 1 a long time ago, and I don't think we need to look at it as fighting with places that cover traditional motorsport. I think we need to see it as something where a huge amount of hobbyist activity, of activity that isn't perceived as within the existing motorsport press, that isn't even perceived as within the existing media, becoming much bigger, becoming much more interesting, because it is a new sandbox that we've been given to play in. So I don't think it's too late for anyone. I know plenty of people who started in their late 20s or 30s, and I think so long as you're willing to be interested and to bring something interesting to the table that is born out of your own curiosity and out of your own desire to express or explain something, then there's infinite appetite for it.
One thing that has interested me when getting into the world of motorsport is straying away from hard news and things like race reports and, like just covering hard facts, is writing more feature opinionated pieces and being able to build a successful career fairly quickly from that, or like how quickly you could do that and make your way. All I know is that when I've grown up through life, at one moment, like for every breath I took, there was probably an opinionated article within The Guardian to do with sports that I read, and I took a lot of that in because I've always been a fairly opinionated person, and I've always had a way with words, which has meant that I like to experiment quite a lot. I try to touch on the artistry side of journalism more than anything else, and try and catch that similar vibe that I've seen in newspaper pieces, in columns, where they take you on a bit of a journey with a story. The facts are still within there, and there's an argument made, but yeah, that side of it is that's probably the part that I found most tricky. Is what, as I've been going along for the past year since I started my blog, and obviously managed to work with a couple of well-known websites now, is that side of things, because there's always room for a race report and there's always room for a new breaking story. But when you're someone who wants to be, I'm not sure how to describe it. Let's compare it to football. So the role that I like taking on most is like Gareth Bale in Spurs, where he was given a free role. I like to be able to write an opinion piece off the cuff and express a view that I've had on my mind for quite a while. Similar to the things that you write on Medium, that a similar style to that. And yeah, it's just trying to build a way, like, while people know that that's the main thing that you do.
I mean, it's a really interesting point, and I mean, I don't know if you read Barney Ronay in The Guardian, but he's got that kind of freewheeling style, which I think, to a certain extent, I've only seen very senior columnists who kind of, in inverted commas, earn the right to do it, get the chance to do that. But
that's exactly my worry. Yeah.
But you know, saying that, you have started early, and I don't think just because you're a match or a race reporter, that doesn't mean that you can't do free expression. I mean, take a look at music. I think we all write about music. I mean, there's people like Paul Morley, who started off as a gig reviewer, and you know, there is obviously a lot more avenue for free expression within music because of what you're writing about, and because you know, you're writing about air molecules, you're writing about something that's not tangible. But I think there's freedom, or room for freedom, within Formula E if you look for it, isn't there, Hazel?
I was going to say, because I come from music journalism, I've done other things as well. Like, I've done sort of like hard newsroom journalism. I've done kind of more war reporting stuff. But basically, I wrote about music, and it's partly why I have a very different tone to a lot of people about racing. I think that it's more interesting to talk about. So a race report, I would write like a gig review. If I was given full license to do the race report that I want, it would be like a gonzo gig review of emotions. And, you know, finally they did the hits. It wouldn't be to everyone's taste, but that would be what I wrote with no editorial constraint. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because a lot of what the reaction that you actually have as somebody who's a fan of something to sport is to do with that, is to do with how it makes you feel. And I think there's a sort of like stuffiness about the way that you're meant to have a proper reaction to sport, that you're meant to have sort of really quite a boring, analytical reaction. Whereas what I like is, you know, and I know this isn't to everyone's taste, but, you know, commentary that's very excitable. It's why Jack Nicholls is really good. It's why Davide Valsecchi is good. It's why Claire Cottingham was really good on the W Series race. There's lots of people who can capture the emotion of sport, and football commentary is often quite a lot more up than motorsport commentary in that sense. And I think, you know, everyone would like to write those pieces, to do those research pieces, to do those opinion pieces, and there's nothing stopping you. There's nothing wrong with doing it, and there's absolutely nothing that would prevent you having a career in doing it. There's a huge appetite for big feature pieces within the press, but also I think the place that is most present, and which people don't think about and nobody can stop you doing it, is just do a video to YouTube. Teach yourself rudimentary video editing skills. There's some really basic software, and just do a video to YouTube. You can not show your face, you can just record it and put photos in front of it. But you see that there are F1 YouTubers like the F1 Word, for instance, who has a really sizable number of subscribers, and that's sort of just, or there's a lot of them that to some extent that's the entirety of their production, and it's because people are interested in hearing an opinion, but perhaps if it isn't viable in a written format, then you just need to look at different ways. I mean, basically, we're doing an opinion piece right here. We're doing an opinion feature.
I mean, the reason I love podcasting is because it's a lot more fun than an interview. You don't need to write it up.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I mean, thank God no one's transcribing this, because frankly, I crack on far too much.
And I've said all too little as well, and what I have said has probably not been too worthwhile. But yeah.
Well, I mean, to be honest, you know, I'm kind of new to this, and maybe I could have given the time out more equally. But I kind of think that you've both got sharp elbows, and you're both able to come into the conversation when you need to. So I just let it roll.
Oh yeah, it's no issue. A lot of those points, I just didn't feel like I could contribute all that much. Like, honestly, when that race was being shown, I was in a train station in Manchester, trying to watch the race while trying to make sure that I got my next train. And
wow.
Yes, it was. I was relying on data, and there were a few parts that I missed. That's probably why I had such a probably basic opinion of Sims incidents, because all I saw was like one piece of footage for each, and didn't see the full story.
I don't think your opinion was particularly basic. I think I've had to think about it more. I was trying to interview Alexander Sims about it, and I'd actually forgotten that they'd kind of happened, because quite a lot happens during the race. And you go down, you do the post-race press conference. Or, well, you slam in your race report. I've just been like typing finishing times for 5 minutes frantically. Run to the post-race press conference. Have 3 conversations with people, run downstairs, and you go to the media pen, and then you grab the nearest driver and be like, right, I should talk to them about things. Fortunately, well, not fortunately, unfortunately, I said, hi, how are you, to Alexander Sims, and he was dragged away to the stewards. So,
that was what that tweet was about.
Yeah, no, that was Simsy. Bless him. Yeah. He was completely up for doing an interview.
I mean, he is. I mean, he is just such a lovely guy. From his media presence, I can understand that Andre Lotterer might not have been so welcoming, but you know, Simsy is brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say Andre has always been really generous and polite to me during interviews. I was using him as an example of, like, don't know, just a driver that sprang to mind.
One thing that made Sims very relatable for me was the incident, was it in Rome, where he was out qualifying and then he sat down with the umbrella?
Oh, bless you.
I think we've all been Sims at that point in time.
And I think that was on a level, if not greater, than the Fernando Alonso deck chair meme.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed that one more. Definitely so.
I mean,
that's the other thing that you can do as somebody who wants to make non-standard content. Is like, you know, half of what I do is essentially memes.
What girl in the pit lane does something very similar, where she rates the top 10 memes that she gets sent on Twitter, I believe, for every F1 race. That's a good niche.
And I think this is the thing that people miss when they say, "Oh, I want to be a proper journalist, like whoever." You know, actually, you know, journalism is changing. I mean, one of the most popular motorsport sites out there is WTF1, which doesn't do traditional journalism at all. It does memes and GIFs and funny stuff, you know, and it works really well.
Yeah. And in fact, oh God, I need to get back in touch with them and apologise for having a brief nervous breakdown and not finding any copy for a couple of races. Which, don't do that. That's my pro tip as a journalist. No nervous breakdowns, no matter how much you feel like it. But
can I just interrupt for one? Can I just do a partridge for 1 second and say that? I've never been in any avenue of journalism before where I've noticed so many people being so open about mental health. I don't know if it's something in the water in motorsport, but it feels like everyone is willing to write a column about their various foibles, and it's made me more open, so it's great. But it's just an interesting point.
I think it's sorely needed because in an area like motorsport, one thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of fans, and I'm sure we've all had them in our comment sections before, where they always say that the men have got to be men, that the halos shouldn't be there, that it's all got to be dangerous, just like the good old days where there were about 5 drivers dying a season, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And the more people that write about mental health and to do with motorsport, how motorsport's helped them, trends that they've noticed, how how people are becoming more open, how the drivers are, I think it's absolutely amazing.
But sorry, Hazel, please carry on.
Okay. Conrad makes a really good point. It comes from a place of, I think a lot of people who are now writing in motorsport, whether they always have been or are relatively new to it, are very aware that there is an intensely toxic environment, that there are intensely toxic attitudes within the sport. Not necessarily within all the sport, and definitely I would say that Formula E really lacks it. Formula E in that sense is, whilst it's not, there is a huge way to go for any part of motorsport to enter even a normal workplace in the 21st century levels of progressiveness. But it is substantially better than elsewhere. And I think there is a combination of older people who are more willing to speak out about it, and definitely people who in general are more willing to talk about, the industry is consumptive. A lot of the work is dangerous, either physically or mentally, and getting into a good mental state is very difficult. It's especially difficult in an age where content is very demanding, where the demands on the teams and drivers as a consequence are very high, where everything is super highly visible, no matter who you are. And there's an intense vulnerability to it. You're also intensely vulnerable, like in terms of perception of sponsors and things. Sponsors no longer want to be associated with brands that are like, we're proper men on fire, because that doesn't really play very well, especially to a younger demographic that the sport wants to attract. So I think there's lots of things going on, but there is a big shift, and I think sport in general is talking about it more.
I should let you both go because it's the evening and you've both got dinners to cook, but thank you so much for coming on. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts finally, and Spotify. And I know. I was amazed how quickly it was approved, but and also YouTube. Get listening and get commenting as well, and don't forget to smash that like button, as they say. Anyway, Hazel Southwell, your articles on Drive Tribe about why Formula E should stay on city circuits forever. It was a good read, and thank you for that. Conrad, what's your latest article?
Expect to see one next week because I'm just wrapping up my uni commitments. I will probably write about how Gen 2 has gone so far, give it a rather belated mid-season review, all aspects of Formula E. Expect to see that up next week. And